being outlaws is in our DNA. That's what it is to be American. We're always the rebel opposition. We're always outnumbered. We're always hated. We're also feared and respected. I wouldn't have things any other way. I'm having a good time.
Hello, evening from the Old North State. Welcome to this week's episode of the Greene Tavern. I'm one of your hosts tonight, Kevbot. With me, I have ChiefSlack, and we also have Mr. Appeal to Heaven. Just as a heads up, our guest canceled at the last moment. We were supposed to have John Slaughter on tonight as our guest. So, as some of you know, whenever our guests cancel at the last moment, we just kind of pick a random topic and we just go on with it. So tonight we're going to be talking a lot about metal, kind of like a mixture of like 80s and 90s metal. Before the stream, ChiefSlack and I were talking about a few things. We're probably going to start off tonight with talking about the rise and fall of 80s hair metal and how 90s grunge kind of took its place. I'll probably get into some aspects of how some 80s bands tried to pivot and just failed miserably. But there's some different things that we can discuss. Slack, what was one of the things that you were discussing before we started the stream?
Yes, I was leaning into 80s hair metal is kind of the, I guess, like swan song, or really the greatest expression of kind of the boomer culture, like their generation, like that kind of encapsulates them the best. And you can draw like a straight line from the Beatles all the way through to the 80s hair movement. It's interesting when you look at it, the coming of age of the boomer generation for a number of them was really in the 60s into the 70s. And that's when they were really starting to figure out themselves, but they were also being heavily propagandized at the same time. So you had a lot going on, and I forget the name of the guy. He was a Russian agent. He had a I think a Canadian or American name is like Thomas like Schul or something like that. Anyway, he wrote a book called Love Letter to America. And he got somewhat popular, a little popular in the 80s, and then he's had a recent resurgence. Because he was pretty much showing like, hey, like y'all were being infiltrated and propagandized by the Soviets. And a lot of that had to do with liberals in the United States, like leaving an open door or straight encouraging them to come in, and how the civil rights movement and how rock and roll and how all of the 60s was pretty much just a giant like psyop from liberals and communists to destabilize and destroy the United States. And so you have this generation of people who they're coming out of the ashes of the Second World War. Their parents fought in that thing, and it was it was a mind-breaking war, catastrophic, unlike anything the world's seen. I guess you could say like Black Death and like other things in the past, but like catastrophic, like apocalyptic across Europe. And it broke a lot of people's brains. And for them to really be okay with what happened, they really had to drink the Kool-Aid. And so it just so happened, our industry was good. We had a golden age. And so you have this generation of kids that have like the world is their oyster. They're being heavily propagandized. And, I would say 9 out of 10 teenagers and like early 20s people will rebel against their parents. So they push back against their parents who were Kool-Aid men of Kool-Aid men. Like they were making the Kool-Aid at that point for the American project and what was to be American culture. And so they were pushing back against that. And just so happened there's this incredible propaganda machine in front of them that was just pushing all these different ideas in front of them. And you had these revolutionary ideas just spring forward. And it started really with, the British rock thing. And they came out and like, oh, this is edgy, this is different, and that's started their expression, like, oh, my parents hate this, so I'm going to lean into this. And the thing is, once you do something enough, you have to do it more and you have to do it harder. And so you fast forward all the way through the 70s, and then you get to the 80s, and it's like the boomers have come, they have arrived, and they know who they are, and they know what they want. And what was a seed back in the 50s blossoms into a flower in the 80s. And so what you see in the 80s with 80s hair metal is just this vapid, empty music. And a lot of people will look back on it with warm memories today, just like they look back at Reagan with warm memories. It's like anyone looks back at anything with warm memories, that nostalgia of like, oh, we had a country back then. Oh, people made music. Oh, it sounded better. But what they miss is the meaning and what it represented. And 80s hair metal, you have bands like Whitesnake, Quiet Riot, Def Leppard, just making music that's so degenerate. Like the messaging of it, what they want, what they represent. And what happened was during the 80s, you had your Gen Xers who were coming up. And by the time they were coming up, the propaganda wasn't as thick. And it started to fall apart a little bit. And by the time they hit their coming of age and they looked and they're like, oh, this is actually empty. There's nothing here. And so you have this grunge movement that's kind of like the spiritual expression of Gen Xers running out, you know, like they're running out of school, like they just graduated and they're happy and they're run out and it's an empty parking lot. There's nothing there. And so they're looking around like, wait a second, like, you know, I was told it was going to be, you know, all these great things, and they just didn't have a purpose. There wasn't any purpose behind it. You know, the sex, drugs, rock and roll. Sure, it might be fun. Sure, it might be lustful, pleasurable in the moment. But once you enter it and you keep chasing that down and down and down, like you eventually arrive where you're like Motley Crue and you just hit rock bottom. Like, there's nothing else here. Like, it's just, that's it, you know? And that's kind of what, I mean, I'm not a Gen Xer. Kev, you're our resident, so like you could speak to this much better than I could, but from what I can piece together, some kind of a music nerd, that's really what it looked like, you know, and that's why Nirvana got to be so popular, because they were just this black pilled, like straight doom level band that just came out and like nothing matters. Like, it turns out our country is like, we don't have a culture. There's nothing here. It's just consumer materialism that's depraved at its root. And that's what everyone is celebrating.
I saw, so growing up so I am the resident Gen Xer, but I am a little bit more of a Xennial. Like I'm at the I'm the last year of the last year or two, because they keep on changing what Gen X is. Like they keep on expanding it out a little bit. But at one point in time, I was in the last year of what Gen X's were. So like I'm a little bit more of a Xennial, I guess. Like I guess I have like a little bit of both of the traits, but you know, I'm definitely a child of the 80s and a teenager of the 90s. So I got to see both worlds. No, I'm going to preference all this of I am a big fan of 80s hair metal. Like that is a lot of the music that I listened to when I was a kid. Was never a fan of rap. So, and I was always drawn to the guitar. Like, in fact, Def Leppard was my first band that probably my first favorite band, if you will. Def Leppard Pyromania. So that came out when I was about 4 or 5. And that the song Photograph kind of like just changed my life. From then on out, I wanted to be a rock star. I didn't want to do anything else other than that. So all that to say, I see the parallels between the boomer to Gen X, or even to some extent, you can look at you can look at grunge music a little bit, or to some extent, Gen Xers are in some ways are very comparable at that time. Now, obviously, Gen Xers, or a lot of people call them spiritual boomers, and I agree with that to some extent, because I see it a lot with a lot of my Gen X friends. But there are a lot of Gen Xers, kind of like myself, that definitely feel the same way that Zoomers do. We've had certain advantages that the Zoomers didn't have. But I see the 80s like hair metal being like excess. Like it was complete total access. Like it was an absolute wild time. Everybody's having fun. complete degenerate lifestyles. No one realized exactly what they were throwing away by just partying all the time. There was no focus on anything except for just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Very, very, very much like the parallel with the boomers. Now, some of those guys are actually boomers. Some of them are older Gen Xers. So there is that parallel that we're talking about. In the 80s, a lot of those guys were in their 20s. So you definitely have those particular parallels going on. And by the time you get to grunge, when you listen to a lot of these guys that were artists, and you can make fun of them a lot, that's fine. I do with a lot of them too. But when you listen to them and you talk to a lot of Gen Xers, we felt like those opportunities that those guys had were gone. Like, we didn't see the American dream the way that those guys got to experience. A lot of those opportunities had started to disappear. Like, by the time you got to my age, like most people, we had already started hearing stuff like, you're not going to have Social Security when you retire. You're probably never going to retire. And I was a teenager. So it only makes sense, like, when you look back at it now. In some ways, grunge was a total rejection of hair metal, but it was also very similar to the attitudes that we see today, where the Zoomers are willing to completely break the system and tear it all down, burn it down, in order to create something new. So those parallels are very, very, if you do a deep dive into it, I would say that your analysis on that is correct.
Well, I think jumping in on that too, like people make fun of grunge all the time because it's just like sad boy throat music, but looking at Nirvana, and I'm not a Nirvana fan myself, like, you don't get much better a representation of the purposelessness that people were feeling. Like, they were just so empty and fed up. And I think the interesting thing, and like, people say all the time, like, oh, there isn't like, they always push so hard against spirituality and belief and everything, but everyone has it inside of them, whether they know it or not. And like, Nirvana is just like a perfect example of that, where you have these guys and they come from nothing, like a bunch of nobodies, and they start making this music because they're expressing what they're feeling in their soul, even though they can't put their finger on it exactly. Like, a lot of them will say, oh, it's capitalism, or oh, it's like this or that, or I don't like Reagan, or like, they were like, oh, we don't want to dress like those hair people, like they kind of were shooting outside the target, but they were coming close to it. And so you have Nirvana, and they just start making music, not with any intention of ever becoming popular, just to really kind of put a tourniquet on a flesh wound, like their souls were bleeding out and they needed to do something about it. So they made the music that they made to express who they are and what they were feeling. And because it was something organic, because it was something real, like, no matter if you like the music or not, like, Nirvana was making like real music. Like, that was something from someone's soul, and when you have a culture of 80s hair metal that is, I do enjoy it from time to time myself, but at a certain point, it's just like it is today. just copy and pasted music, like same message, same general progression. Like you have different singers, they all sound a little different, but it's essentially the same thing over and over again. And then, so you have like all this empty music, and then, or I guess not empty, but soulless music. And then you have like something that's like someone's speaking from their soul, and it's like they're lamenting, they're hurting, and this is what they're producing with that pain. That's going to register with a lot of people. And especially when you have a whole generation, like you were saying, it's like they were already starting to let y'all down and say, hey, like, hey, you ain't getting retired. You ain't going to get Social Security. You ain't going to get all of these benefits we got. So y'all just better buckle up so you can subsidize us, So you have a generation of people being told that. All of a sudden there's like a band that says like, hey, we feel it, and here's what we have to say about it. So that's why that's why they registered so hard, Yeah. And
there were obviously bands that were lumped in with the whole hair metal thing, that were clearly not the same as some of those, but man, by the end of hair metal, there were even some, like there were bands that were just constantly talking about like, dude, I think Motley Crue actually was, Nikki Sixx did an interview once, and by the time grunge started becoming, again, this is kind of like a parallel. There are some people that do recognize, but I think by the time, like Nirvana, bands like Nirvana, and we can get into this later, but there are bands that get lumped into grunge that are not. And a hill that I'll die on is Alice in Chains was not a grunge band. They were the next iteration of hard rock. But I digress. But by the time those bands started getting big, you had guys like Nikki Sixx saying, we all sound the same. We're all talking about the same, and these guys are actually talking about something somewhat relatable and real. And if we can't adjust, then maybe it is our time to essentially go out.
Oh yeah, and I mean, talking like Alice in Chains wasn't grunge. Like people get awfully, and being a metal guy, you'll totally get this. They get very generous with the labels and genres that they put on things. They'll say, "Oh yeah, all that's metal," all that's like this, and it's like, no, like especially when you get in the metal and you really deep dive into it, it's like specifics. Like this is what defines black metal. Like, and they can like, there's a list out there for what is black metal and what is not. And the bigger thing behind it, because a lot of metal has like blast beats. A lot of metal has, you can break down like different types of screaming, like all these different things. But the big difference between all of that is the attitude and the spirit behind the music.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest delineator between speed and thrash or black or like whatever. Like it's the intention behind the music. And
it's similar to the saying of, like I know I'm an American when I see or talk to one. When you hear metal and different genres, it's like when you hear it, yeah.
And then after you listen to it for a while, like you can understand, like you'll pick up on like, oh, that's someone speaking something there. Like unpopular opinion, Metallica is totally overrated and should have stopped after And Justice for All. Like shouldn't have made another album after that. Just my 2 cents. But I know I'm going to get a bunch of hate for that, but
no, you're no. So like for me, it's like I don't think you're wrong. But I will have to say that I do enjoy the Black Album just mostly out of nostalgia. But as I've gotten older, it's Megadeth. Megadeth is way more deserving of the credit than.
I mean, that's the thing. Like the Black Album was the first metal album I ever bought. I bought that when I was like 10. something like that. And it was like, oh wow, that's cool. It just kind of pulled me in. And then after I can still remember the first day I heard Megadeth changed my entire perspective on things. Like I was sitting on a bus going to a wrestling camp and they had like some Sirius XM radio station playing on the bus. And I was like, what is that? And it was Megadeth, Sweating Bullets. I was like, yeah, that is like, because I was just big into Metallica. It's like, oh, yes, this is really awesome. I heard that and I was like, whoa, like I'm missing out on something here. And like after that, like I never touched Metallica again. Like once I found the real thing, like once I found something that was real, like it's like, oh, okay, like I get it now, And the same thing can be said for a lot of genres of music. There's always gems in there of guys making something authentic, But anyway, so going back to Nirvana, right? Like what they went through is such a perfect expression of what so many Americans were feeling back then and are feeling today. And there's really, really what they did. I mean, it's like, it's essentially like the path Nirvana took. It's really like, which way, Western man? And it's like, this is what's in front of you, like there isn't another way, or at least up until now. Now we're starting to see the winds of change blowing, but until the past couple of years, like it's literally been Nirvana all the way down. Like that's all we have. That was the only path you had, where you had, they lament, they hurt when they're younger, and they mature, they get popular, and they figure out like, oh, I've made some money, and I feel even worse about it because it's empty. It's still purposeless. Money is a means, not an end. And so you either have like, the drummer going off and being like, no, I love money. I'm just going to be a Kool-Aid man. Sign me up.
Yeah.
I'm just going to, just like any Republican you see today, I'm going to be all about it. You have, their first bassist, guitarist guy, like he's like, hey, this is gay and dumb. I'm going to find some purpose for my life. What's he do? Joins the army, becomes a Green Beret, spends like a dozen years in Afghanistan or something like that, fighting the sand wars. You got the guy who replaced him just goes off the reservation, becomes some leftist activist, and spends the rest of his life shrieking into the void. Okay. And then you arrive at Kurt Cobain, where not only was the lack of purpose so overwhelming, but the only thing he created was then used as a tool against him. And he had essentially nothing. And because he had nothing, there's nothing to live for. And he had no hope. He had no spiritual connection to the world. His spirit was longing for something. He was longing for a spiritual outlet, a spiritual connection, and a spiritual purpose in life, but he couldn't find it anywhere. And so he, without acknowledging the spiritual world, without acknowledging, Christ, without acknowledging what you're actually here for, and to have the only thing that mattered to you, not just broken, but used against you, like reared in metal, to use a cringy Atlas Shrugged reference. And that was too much for him to bear. And he took his life. And there's also a litany, of, substance abuse in there as well, which is par for the course, when you're dealing with despair. It's hard to get people hooked on drugs when they have purpose and ambition and hope. You know, it's much easier when people are destitute, and not just financially, but spiritually. And they don't have a people, and they're just commoditized. So, I mean, you literally have like the four outlets, you know, you either just become a house liberal, you join the military, you become a liberal, just shrieking liberal, or if you can't find one of those places, you just either dive down the hole of substance abuse or kill yourself, you know. And that's, like, I would say for most of America, like, that probably strikes a chord, you know. Like, I was searching for purpose. I went to college to figure out what it means to be a man, because I never knew what it meant. And I had this calling to find purpose. So I joined the military and I arrived. And after I was done with boot camp, I knew, like, this isn't it. You know, like, I started my countdown timer to get out the day after I got my phone back when I was graduating boot camp. You know, like, this ain't it. Like, you know, I had a tranny class in boot camp where the commanding officer sat down and told us about how we need to be accepting for trannies. It's like, yeah, this ain't it, man. You know, so, like, this is, and there's so many of us who have reached out for something we haven't found it, and, you know, thankfully we found it now. Like, we're starting to put our feet underneath ourselves and find it, and find some steady ground to stand on to do something with. But I mean, that's why, like, you know, when you mention the topic of 80s hair metal into grunge, it's like, it's such a beautiful, beautiful in a dramatic way.
Yeah.
This metaphor for the American experience. You know, like, it fits us. I don't know about y'all, but it fits me so well. It fits so many people I know so well.
No, it to me, it is definitely there are a lot of parallels to today. Like, I see a lot of hate for Gen X, even boomers, and sometimes in a lot of cases it is very warranted. In other cases, it's not. No, obviously, most of this does come from millennials, and I understand their beef. But, you know, in a lot of ways, I think that millennials are very more comparable to boomers than what Gen Xers are, in several different ways. However, when you live through that time period, and looking at it now, especially the way that you were putting it, they are very, very comparable. Now, one thing that I would like to say, and it kind of goes into this question, you know, we're talking a lot about 80s hair metal into grunge. During this time, during this transitory period between the late 80s to early 90s, you did have different genres to start popping up. You had, you know, during the 80s, you had thrash metal. You had what a lot of people consider, there's arguments that some people say the late 80s were a golden era for thrash metal. You have others that say the early 90s were the golden era of thrash metal, but you definitely had speed and thrash metal. You know, death metal was coming up and becoming a newer scene. So was black metal during this time. You had even other subgenres like industrial metal and stuff that really started kicking off in the late 80s, even in the early 90s. But one thing that I do want to kind of bring into this conversation, because we would not be patriots if we didn't. So I Am the Guardian has this one question here, and this kind of plays into my thinking a little bit. Is there a place for rock in our heritage American culture, or is rock just a form of degrading society? No, that's a great question. And I'll kind of go off in a couple of different answers here. Yes, I think that there is a place for metal in the culture, especially given what we have today. I think that I've always thought, really up until recently, metal was very much a right wing. It had a lot of right wing ideology. It leaned a lot of times really into some libertarian ideology, but it was a very right wing thing because it was gate kept. No, obviously you have genres like black metal and death metal that touch on some darker subjects. I will say, just from my experience, most of that is just for imagery. Obviously you have bands like Slayer that use some dark imagery, but you have guys in that band that are actually Christians. Bands like, Megadeth kind of get thrown into the whole satanic mix, but Dave Mustaine's a Christian. He's not always been a practicing Christian, but Dave Mustaine did convert later on. There are a lot of Christians within metal. And you can look at it in different ways. It could be somewhat of like a missionary work. And in a perfect society, you could say, like, no, extreme forms of music shouldn't exist. We're not. One thing that I do try to tell people all the time is that's in your idealistic society. We're not an idealistic society. Like, you have to deal with the reality that you're in. Now, does that mean that everyone should act degenerate, or is that genre completely void of degeneracy? No, there's a lot of degeneracy, much like in country music, rap, pop music, and stuff like that. I do think that there is a place for it. You do have a lot of right wing chuds that are in metal. It's not as healthy as it used to be. I think it is something like guys like myself and Black Metal Enjoyer, we are definitely trying to take the genres back. We talk about this sometimes online. But it used to be very much a very right-wing genre. Now, kind of within that kind of go off into this tangent a little bit. We're talking about hair metal and grunge and some of these other genres to kind of come about. One parallel that I like to look at, to me, the most heritage American metal band of all time. This is probably the first you've ever heard this. Breaking news. Pantera was the ultimate heritage American metal band. And they were doing something completely against the grain compared to everybody else. Sure, they took influences from other genres. They themselves, at one point in time, back in the 80s, were a hair metal band. But clearly in the 90s, in 1990, when they released Cowboys from Hell, they had something completely different. And they essentially went their own way. So it's like they took the roots of these different items and different genres and just created their own thing. Now, obviously, there are some arguments that they ripped off from bands like X Order and stuff like that. And that's a completely different stream or topic there. But I like to view the parallel of a band like Pantera doing their own thing. Within 5 years of them coming out with that album and just working hard, touring nonstop, just being themselves and doing whatever they could, they went from just kind of being like, who is this band, to having the number one selling album in America by like 1995 or 94 with Far Beyond Driven. No radio play, not on MTV or anything like that. And I like to look at that band as some, regardless of their issues, there was a lot of drug abuse and different stuff like that. But obviously their work ethic was something very, very much like a lot of guys that I know. Like, I like to draw that parallel of what they did and like what guys like us, like in the OGC and the NGS are doing. Like, we've taken a foundation and some of these elements from the past, but we're creating our own new thing. And ultimately they became, for many, the greatest metal band of all time. Any thoughts on that, Slack?
Yeah, I mean, where to start with Pantera? They became the number one metal band, and they rocked stars and bars. That is, those two things shouldn't be said together, but they did. What they did was what it's kind of like how I talked about Nirvana. They just did it better because and going back to the point of like different metal groups and everything, and like, or different genres and everything else. I mean, a lot of that comes down to Nirvana hit such a broad, they painted with such a broad brush unknowingly. And that's why they were commercialized so quickly. And that's why they like it. The whole grunge thing was kind of burnt out so quick. Like, it was done. It didn't last. Whereas with metal, guys purposefully made themselves more and more niche and more gate kept and more alienated from the general population. Like, there's no way black metal is going to become the number one music in the United States. Like, it's just not. It's designed and purpose built that way. And so guys use
That
they
too.
use
Like,
they use
yeah,
black metal. They use all these different harder and more refined niches. The same way Nirvana started out was, we're we're lost, we're hurting, we're looking for something, we're looking for a purpose, we're looking for a group, we're looking for an identity, we're looking for something bigger than being a wage slave and just like looking forward to grilling on the weekends and watching football. Like, they wanted more than that. Now I mean, people will point out exceptions, like, oh yeah, well, look at all these, queers doing this stuff. It's like, okay, got it. Yeah. But look at those exceptions you point out prove the rule. Like, the fact that you have to like find these exceptions, you have to find these things, like the overwhelming spirit and nature and organization of each one of these genres shows you what they're looking for. Shows you, I mean, they might be heading in the wrong direction. It might be, like doing some like weird Finnish, doom metal project thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, they don't know what they're looking for. They're grasping at straws, trying to find, but you can see where their mind's at, where their heart's at. Now with Pantera, though, if you ever look at their live performances, it was a bunch of, like, I'd venture to say 90 plus percent of their like dedicated fan base was young, angry white men. And what Pantera did was speak to those guys and give them a purpose and say, like, hey, look, we get you. And, the culture's trying to longhouse you. Like, everyone's trying to rip everything away from you. You're getting kicked to the back of the bus. Like, but what we're going to do for you is say, hey, you can be effing hostile, like we're going to get aggressive about it. Their front man would chug a bottle of Jack Daniels on stage, like, just super aggressive. And the thing that you'll find scrubbed the most, and I think it's interesting. I mean, like, you have to look for it. It doesn't ever just pop up. You have to look for it, but like the commentary that they had, you know, like their interviews, and like they were super against like rap music. Like no, that's not a white man's project. You shouldn't be listening to it. And just for them to say that in front of a camera in the '90s, just blew people's brains. Like just popped them like grapes. And so, I mean, they had a lot of internal division. They had a lot of internal strife. I got a whole tinfoil hat thing on Dimebag Daryl. I won't go into that now, but it goes to show, like, these guys, while they didn't have a movement, they didn't have like a rallying cry. It wasn't like a, hey guys, vote for this policy. We're gonna fix this by, reforming Medicare. It's like, no, they were speaking to the soul and to the spirit of men that were being pushed aside.
Yeah, I was very, very fortunate to see them twice in the '90s. They were actually my first like real concert. I had like been to some shows and I had played some shows. I started playing shows when I was like 15. But by the time I was 16, I was getting snuck into venues to play. But yeah, I got to see them 2 times in the '90s, and yeah, those events were exactly as you described. It still to this day, almost I think the first time I saw them was about 30 years ago or something. I think I saw them in '96 and '97. Still probably the best shows that I've ever been to. And I did see them on their newer tour with the tribute tour, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
And it was clearly not the same. God bless Zach Wilde. He is a Christian, but he is not Dimebag Daryl. But he's a great guitarist in his own right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole right there. Black Label Society. If you want to, you want to talk about his first project, Pride and Glory. I mean,
yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that was a guy I used to be in a band with. He used to love Pride and Glory, man.
Yeah, they're a different bunch.
Yep. Well, we're coming up to the last few minutes of the stream. We do have a couple of questions that we can hit on, if y'all want to. We do have one super chat, and actually we got another one on Entropy as well. We'll get to that one in a moment. Yeah, from the old North Stater. Kev, can you explain every type of metal to me like I'm 5? And rank which are the coolest and least cool to you?
Well, I guess if we don't have a guest next week, you can sit down for 2 hours and go over all that.
Yeah. The quick and dirty, you have just metal, power metal, thrash metal, speed metal, black metal, death metal, industrial metal, and we kind of named a few of those. You got progressive metal, you have shoegaze metal, you have like black metal mixed with like shoegaze. You have this whole thing that started back a few years ago of like retro metal, kind of like retro death metal. You have doom metal, sludge metal. I mean, it goes on for quite some time. But my favorite, I I'm a death metal, black metal guy. Those are the two genres that I listen to the most. I'm really into industrial black metal as well. It's sort of a niche genre. There's not a ton of bands that do it and do it well, but it is a genre that I really do like a lot. There's something about that that genre that really gets to me. I love sludge. Like and sludge and doom can sort of be interchangeable at times, which we did discuss Alice in Chains for a second. But what I will say is Alice in Chains, you don't hear many bands like them nowadays. However, it is interesting that there are a lot of sludge bands that are definitely inspired by bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. Just because of their particular style, which is why I don't consider them grunge. I consider them more of the next iteration of hard rock. They got lumped into that, and yeah, they happen to be from Seattle, but I mean, so was Candlebox, and Candlebox wasn't a grunge band at all. So, and I wouldn't consider Pearl Jam to be grunge either. I consider it to be a lot more like liberal corporate rock. So, yeah. My least favorite genre is probably the whole shoegaze black metal stuff. Like I there's some bands that are very popular right now that I'm not going to name that I know that a lot of guys really do like, but it's just not my cup of tea. That is probably like the least coolest to me. But yeah, how about you, Slack? Do you have any?
Oh man. So I guess if I'm gonna put on a genre, it's probably gonna be thrash. Because I'm a little bit more, I don't want to sound high class because I'm not, but generally, like I appreciate the music a lot more. So like when I listen to metal, I could throw out a handful like metal bands, but I'm not gonna name anyone's names. I don't want to, get sued or something, but or get this video taken down. But there's some that are really musically put together, and you can tell they're thinking about what they're doing. They're not just doing like chorus, verse, chorus, guitar solo. Like, it's like they're actually thinking about what they're doing, and it's really well put together. And there's a whole nother topic you can go into of like the parallels between classical music and metal. There's a lot to be said for a lot of metal music where it's just like this higher expression of capability. So, and all that being said,
stream just on that.
Yeah. And all that being said, I mean, I would probably have to say like, yeah, thrash is probably my favorite. My least favorite's probably, I don't know, like soulless, like just some soulless garbage, like, oh shoot, I've been forced to see them against my will twice because I was wanting to see another band and then they were a part of it. Oh man, I can't think of the name of that group. They were popular in the 2000s.
Whitechapel.
But no, they're more like that like rap metal stuff.
Oh yeah.
What is their name?
That either.
Like it's just like this commercialized like soulless music. Like, it just does not appeal to me at all. Like there has to be something to it, and if there's something to it, I can generally appreciate it. But I definitely have like flavors and trends that I go to. Like, well, I guess like Dream Theater's like second album. I think it's their second album, Awake. Like that one's my favorite. Like just musically there, like you listen, and that's the thing, like their entire album is set up to be listened straight through as one song, as one piece, and there's movements in that piece, and that's like what you would call the songs. It's like movements, and they thought through every single note, every single beat, every single transition. And it's just like you listen through a wake, just cover to cover. Just sit down, close your eyes and listen to it. And it's a masterpiece, and that's kind of the music like I am drawn to.
Yeah. I'm not really quick. I'm not a fan of gentcore or deathcore, really. Just mostly because of what you were discussing. A lot of it's very overproduced and sterile, in my opinion. But to each his own. We have Pat on Entropy for $3. He says, "Enjoyed the stream. Keep rocking. Thank you, Patriot." We do have Mr. Forte. Hello, sir. He wants your. He wrote later and said Dimebag, but he says DM him for your tenfold theory on Dimebag.
All right. I mean, I don't have social media anymore, so
okay.
I can give you like the short and sweet of it, like the elevator pitch of it. Was the the CRS folks used a CIA waterboarded kid or whatever, like some tortured soul to go kill Dimebag because his motivations, his everything, everything about this guy is sketchy, and Pantera was the fly in the ointment for the government, and especially the race folks, the CRS folks. Like, if I could say one pop culture entity that the CRS folks wanted to destroy, it would have been Pantera. So,
good one.
That's the short and sweet of it.
Last one. And it's from I Am the Guardian again. Thank you, sir. Was 2000s rock considered good? I found myself. I have fond memories of Rob Zombie and Disturbed. I personally, for rock music, I feel like rock music, the iteration of true rock music died with the quote unquote kind of grungy era. But I think rock music is kind of taking a different form nowadays. So I have a very nuanced opinion about it that we don't have enough time to get into. But for like rock, I didn't listen to a lot of 2000s rock myself. I would say Rob Zombie was more kind of catchy rock metal. I prefer White Zombie over Rob Zombie, though. I saw White Zombie in concert actually with Pantera, which was totally like the best show I've ever been to. So I'm a huge White Zombie fan. But Rob Zombie was good. I never got into Disturbed. I always kind of made fun of Disturbed, to be honest. I'm sorry. I am the Guardian. I always saw bands like Disturbed. And again, this could probably totally be a different stream, but I saw bands like Disturbed and a lot of country artists during the early 2000s as being a part of the propaganda machine. I've not revisited any of that since, I've kind of grown and changed a lot of my thinking. So for better or worse, I just saw them as part of like the George Bush propaganda machine at the time. I've never revisited any of that stuff. Disturbed has never been my thing because I didn't, especially during that time. I was playing in death metal bands and stuff. I was doing some touring and stuff like that back then. So there really weren't a lot of bands on the radio that I was listening to. I think probably the most popular band during that time period that I was listening to was maybe Chevelle. And I'd have to kind of go back and check, but 2000s rock for me, there's not many bands that stand out. But again, I don't really, as I've gotten older, I really don't like knocking what people dig and stuff. How about you, Slack or Colt?
I mean, if you're
Creed. I know that's not metal.
No, but they were. I would say that Creed falls into the late '90s, 2000s rock, and Creed's just never been my thing. But
you know what? Everyone hates them, but everybody knows their songs. It's gonna be
Creed.
It's gonna be Nickelback. I don't like Nickelback, and I'm a bandwagon hater. But there's probably not a Nickelback song that people don't know. So,
well, I mean, and to defend Nickelback, like that song, was it like Rockstar or whatever?
yeah.
Like, I mean,
Everybody's MySpace song back in the day, they're like, this song just totally identifies with me, bro. It's like, dude, you're like 16.
Yeah.
You get to like their MySpace page is like lime green with like red letters, 5 YouTube videos playing at the same time, and Rockstar.
Yeah.
I only know that Photograph song because of the meme. Look at this graph or whatever that meme. But by then I had completely checked out of most pop culture because like I was never at home. Like I was always playing shows around that time when those bands were big. So I would hear stuff like when I was in the venue, but like like when you're a musician, especially really before smartphones are everywhere, like you are really cut off from a lot of pop culture. You might get some interaction with pop culture just speaking with your friends that are not related to music, or if you're like you got a day off and you're just like sleeping around or whatever and the TV's on, like you might get some interaction with it. But I wasn't too I just would see their pictures from time to time. They were always all over magazines and stuff.
Well, I mean, with like Disturbed and all that, like, if you're a purity spiralist, like one of those folks, two good bellwethers for if your choice of music is like normie and soulless, is like if it's broadly commercialized, like that's usually a pretty good sign. And then if they play it like on like award shows and like during the Super Bowl, it's like, like you're probably not listening to anything half decent if all you're listening to is like what they play at the Super Bowl or like during March Madness or something. You're like, you're probably listening to garbage, or at least soulless music.
I'm always tripped out like whenever music that I listen to like randomly gets played on something. I'm like, what's happened here?
Well, and I think recently there's been a change. Like you'll see like nods to different people, and like a bunch of people will say like they're pro Pantera now, and they'll like play songs from them, or you'll hear like Pantera, and it's more of an acknowledgement of like, hey, we couldn't kill this, so we're gonna try and kill it with silence and not say anything about it, and they just kind of let it be, and that's kind of where that's at least in my opinion.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this tonight. And audience, we really do appreciate y'all sticking with us tonight. I know some of y'all tuned in to see or listen to Mr. Slaughter. But you got our metal talk for the night. It was actually a really great conversation. We should probably do this again. We might actually do this again for a Greene Tavern episode or something. We just completely off the cuff. So we might actually try to put something together and actually do a proper show on this stuff. So Slack, Appeal to Heaven. Do y'all have anything to say before we wrap up the stream?
No, great show.
Yeah, I think I'm good. I think I spoke for half of it, so I'm all tuckered out.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week, and thank y'all so much. We'll see y'all again.